Hey there, Radioheads. Welcome to another episode of Radio KBE. I hope everybody's doing well. As always, I appreciate the folks that like and subscribe and share the videos whenever they hit Twitter or whenever they're on YouTube. And I appreciate all the comments. It's really been helping the channel out a lot. We're almost to 500 subscribers, which is awesome. My goal was to try to get to 1,000 subscribers before the regular season started, and I feel like we're pretty much on pace, if not ahead of schedule when it comes to that. So I appreciate all the folks that have been sort of reaching out. I'm not in my regular sort of location recording this, so I apologize if the audio sounds a little bit different. I didn't bring my mic and stuff like that, so I'm just kind of running this right off the laptop. Uh, so today I wanted to talk a little bit about just what you're probably going to see moving forward. I'm recording this on July 23rd. And so there's been a lot of stuff that's been shared this week, about the Lakers not wanting to give up picks and stuff like that. And how many picks do they actually want to give up? And then, as usual, people on Twitter that are not Laker fans are very invested in making sure that the Lakers give up two picks. Like it's very clear that the Lakers giving up two picks is like this thing where no matter what we get back in return, it's still going to be looked at as like a victory for whoever's not a Laker fan. So if the Lakers give up two picks for Kyrie, well, that's a win for the Nets. If the Lakers give up two first rounders for Buddy Hield and Miles Turner, it's a win for Indiana too as well. So even though those players, some of those players have almost no market value at all. It's, we know how this works. It's the same way it worked for Anthony Davis. It's the same way it works for anybody literally that the Lakers want to trade for. We have to pay more because that's just the perception of how things work. Uh, but the reality of the situation is a little bit more different. The market, there's a guiding principle when it comes to a lot of this stuff, and the guiding principle is really just the market sets the value for the player. It's not the player sets the value for themselves. So, you don't have to look very far if you look at the if you look at the situation and also the people that are negotiating those deals, like negotiating the trade, it's dependent on them, right? So the market for Rudy Gobert may not have been what Minnesota gave up to them. But if Minnesota really wanted him, then that's what it was. I don't know who was bidding that much for him. So now you're seeing like that sort of conversation for Kevin Durant. You're seeing that sort of conversation for Donovan Mitchell now if he ends up getting moved. But the market really dictates just kind of how much a player gets you in return. It also depends on what direction the team is going in situationally and stuff like that. And so that stuff matters too as well. But as it relates to the Lakers, there's sort of two avenues that I've been reading about more and more, where they may be inserted in as a team that just sort of picks up expirings and stuff like that. And first and foremost, the team that there's two teams with cap space right now, and it's the San Antonio Spurs and it's the Indiana Pacers. Now we know that the Pacers tried to get DeAndre Ayton, and then Phoenix matched that offer sheet, and so now Indiana just has a whole bunch of cap space. They can still send out an offer sheet once their hold is up. So they could go after Colin Sexton or, obviously it's not a popular name, but a guy like Miles Bridges, if depending on what his legal situation works out to be. So if there are players out there that haven't gotten the offer sheets that they wanted, maybe Indiana tries to throw an offer sheet at them. Same thing with the Spurs, but the thing with the Spurs is we know that they are definitely trying to tank. They have no interest in being a competitive team. So because those are the two teams with cap space, those are often the teams that are going to be linked, especially Indiana because they have actual players. Those are the two teams that are going to be linked with the Lakers as a potential Russ destination. And so there's been a lot of like haggling online about what it would actually cost to get Buddy Hield and what it would actually cost to get Miles Turner. But the reality of the situation is both of those players have been on the market every single year. Buddy Hield has been on the market even during the Sacramento days for like 4 straight seasons. And Sacramento was only able to move him by attaching Tyrese Halliburton and sending him to Indiana. So if you guys remember, there was a long time ago, not even a long time ago, for a couple of years now, there's been like this big thing where Buddy Hield can really push a contender over the top. And not a single contender is trying to trade for him. None. And he ended up getting traded to the Pacers. And now we're just rehashing the same conversation that we had with the Sacramento King about Buddy Hield on the Sacramento Kings. That he's supposed to be this guy that's supposed to lift you over the top and stuff like that. And like this, one of the best 3-point shooters in the league and stuff like that. But there's more to basketball than just spacing the floor, right? Like what is the difference between Buddy Hield and Duncan Robinson? What is the difference between Buddy Hield and Luke Kennard? They're all tremendous shooters. Luke Kennard's probably the best 3-point shooter in the league, I think, statistically, right? They can space the floor. They're super threats coming off of screens and taking threes and stuff like that. So they're definitely skilled in that realm. But what is the difference between them? Does Buddy play extremely good defense? Does he play really, really good defense compared to Luke Kennard? If you're down towards the end of the game, is Buddy Hield going to be on the floor in the playoffs or even in the regular season? So you can see the value of Buddy Hield in terms of being a floor spacer and stuff like that. But this idea that he's like this super two-way guard that's just been languishing away on a bad team and they could really put a team over the top, I don't think that's entirely accurate, even though people who don't like the Lakers will try and present it that way. And that's sort of the like my view on him. I think he's a really good player. I think he's a really good shooting guard. I think he's a great threat for the Lakers if if Darvin Ham's going to be running more DHO and down screens, just the stuff that Vogel never did if our offensive philosophy changes. So I think but the cost of getting him sounds unreasonable. And people who are doing it based on what his actual basketball value is, I think is very far-fetched. I don't think that's grounded in reality. And so that's why and on top of that, he has a longer-term deal. So he has more total money, right? So people are like, well, Russ is $47 million. It's 1 year, $47 million. Buddy has 2 more years after, or he has an extra year after that. So his total deal over the life of his deal is closer to what Russ is getting. So obviously the Lakers are offering to take on more salary if they do move Russ to Indiana. And it's the same thing with Miles Turner. This is not to say, and I don't like knocking the ability of basketball players. It's just being a little bit more realistic about what their value is around the league, or what their basketball value is on court. What is Miles Turner's actual basketball value on court? So he spaces the floor. He's a very good rim defender, but he hasn't stayed healthy. Like he's played 40 games last season. He's played 40 games the season prior. Availability matters. All of those sort of factors kind of come into play to some degree, right? Like if you're a fan that said, I would rather have Kyrie Irving for 40 games than have Russell Westbrook for 82 games, well, would you have, like, what is the value that you have on that? Like the reason why you're willing to say that is because Kyrie's basketball talent is extremely high, right? Like Kyrie's basketball value is extremely high. I don't know if you could say the same thing about Miles Turner. How much is Miles Turner's basketball value that much higher? Not to say he's not a good player or that he doesn't fit. He certainly can fit in a 4-out offense. But if he gets hurt and he can only play half the season, which is what's happened these past 2 seasons, that becomes a problem. If AD goes down for any reason and we have to lean on Miles, but Miles can't stay healthy, now we're down 2 players, right? And if you guys, if you've been watching the Lakers, you know that the recurring theme with this team has been that when AD goes down, LeBron has to carry a heavier load. And when LeBron has to carry a heavier load, he becomes more prone to injury because he's just more involved in the offense. So that's part of my concern when it comes to some of these trades. If we're going to target guys that are available and are better basketball fits and better basketball talents, or if you're just one of those people who's just of the mind that you just need Russ off the roster, which is going to happen. I'm not too concerned about that. That's fine, but at the same time, we have to be smart about what we're trying to do when we go in this regards. And so the reality of the situation is, will the Lakers have to probably give up a first rounder or a protected first rounder to eventually get Russ to move Russ's contract? For sure. But the value of Russ's contract is not that you have to attach a pick. It's the large expiring, that it can bring back a guy like Kyrie and potentially somebody else, or it can bring back 2 guys. That was the value of Russ's contract because it's expiring, exchanging short term for long term. So that's why you're hearing so much about Indiana. And I think the way that it's being framed, at least the way it's being presented in the media, is that like the Lakers are in a position of desperation and despite all the character attacks that we've been seeing about Russ, like just as an aside, he's played in the league for 14 years, and I've never read or heard anything about him like this. And I'm not saying that he should be on the Lakers next season, but the thing that bothers me the most as a fan is who's sort of pushing this information out, right? Like, I can't imagine the Lakers front office is interested in devaluing Russ's value as a player or as a person even more and hurt their opportunities to, hurt their opportunity to trade him, right? Like the basketball fit's not there. That's clear. Anybody can see that. Like there's no confusion about that. But to go beyond that doesn't make any sense. All you're doing is just hurting your own, player that you're going to trade. And so that's something that it's been so bizarre to see because that's just I think it affects the franchise more, the perception of the franchise more when players are sort of talked about like that when they played on your team. And we know, like anybody with common sense knows that the Lakers' issues were much more greater than just one player itself. He's a core part of the issue, but he's just so many more issues. Like Trevor Ariza hasn't been signed by anybody. Avery Bradley hasn't been signed by anybody. Carmelo, like there's so many teams that already have 15 roster spots. Carmelo may get signed by somebody, but he's not like, there's probably a good chance that he might not get signed by anybody. There are so many players on this, like Wayne Ellington hasn't been signed. Kent Bazemore hasn't been signed. There have been so many players that were expected to be core rotation players for the Lakers last season that haven't even been picked up around the league. So it's not just the perception of just one guy. It's a perception of like that entire roster and how bad it was. And it's just silly that I just think it's silly that there's been so much about Russ when there really shouldn't be. Like it's just he's not going to be on this team. I just don't see a way. I don't think LeBron wants Russ on this team. I think Russ is very aware of that. And I think that's why you don't see like the warm embrace and stuff like that at Summer League, or you don't see them doing anything together. I think the Lakers are leaning very, very heavily on Darvin Ham's relationship with Russ, and the coach, keeping him in the know and being respectful about just kind of who he is as a player and what he has been as a player. But I mean, there's no confusion as to where some of that noise. If you can read between the lines, you know who's pushing some of those stories out and why they're pushing those stories out, and it's just unnecessary. And then this will be the last thing. The story about him splitting with his agent has to be the response to that might be some of the more bizarre responses I've seen. The agent split with Russ, and then he went out and publicly said that he's encouraging Russ to stay with the Lakers and not ask for a trade. But Russ hasn't asked for a trade. And Laker fans don't want him there. And we know that, the powers that be, the folks that have influence within the Lakers, they don't want him there either. So what did the agent gain by saying that, right? Like it's just purely attacking the character of the player, even though he hasn't done what the agent says. So that was the part that was incredibly confusing to me. And then the part that was additionally confusing is that fans are just they were using that. Like they were saying, oh yeah, see Russ, like his agent, like he split with his agent because he's delusional about his value. But if he never requested a trade, then he's doing what the agent wanted him to do. So that's the part that's been really confusing, that like parts of stories don't make any sense at all. And then the actions that are actually happening, line up with what fans want, right? Like you want Russ to opt in so we can trade him, because if he hadn't opted in, you wouldn't have been able to trade him for Kyrie. You wouldn't have had enough salary to trade for Kyrie when Kyrie nuked his market value. So why would you want, and if you don't want Russ on the roster, then why would you take the agent's side when the agent's saying, oh yeah, he should stay with the Lakers and rehab his value? So none of that stuff makes any sense. And, like Chris Haynes' story coming out and saying, that like they had a phone call and stuff like that, Russ, LeBron, and AD before Summer League. Like I come on, we don't believe any of that. It's just, I get it. If you read anything Chris Haynes has written about Russ post the season ending, He's been very critical of him. So like again, I don't care if you're critical of him. Like that's fine. Everybody's entitled to their opinion. But at the same time, like him dropping a story and then the very last line of the story saying that, um, all of the flaws or all the issues with the team were unjustly put on Russ. It's like, well, you were one of the guys who was doing that. So what's going on here? So it's very clear that there's been a lot of not manipulation, but a lot of just kind of influence applied and stuff like that, and getting writers to just bash the character of a player. Again, I don't know why you would go out of your way to do that, because if you go out of your way to do that, then the perception becomes that like you have to give up two picks because this is how terrible of a person he is. And who gains from doing that? Who gains from attacking his character? Unless it's a rival team that's trying to trade with the Lakers. But then why would a rival team go to an LA beat writer and then the LA beat writer push that out? Right? So it can't be a rival team that's doing it because an LA beat writer wouldn't write that based to help out the other team, I would assume, right? So there has to be somebody internal. There's somebody internally that really, really wants Russ off of this team. So me, just reading between the lines, like I think I can figure out who it is that really wants him off this roster. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But the thing is, you're hurting your own position by attacking a guy who hasn't said anything. That's the problem. And so, like that's just sort of the nature of just kind of how these things go. But just moving forward, I think the thing that you're going to see is you're going to see a lot of stuff like moving out. These are two dates that are important for Laker fans to keep track of. The first date is July 31st, which is when players can be stretched and waived. The last day for players to be waived and then their salary stretched, right? I don't think this applies to the Lakers because I don't think they're going to waive and stretch Russ because then that would put a $15 million, it would put a $15 million cap hit for the next 3 seasons. It would lower it would lower our luxury tax and our cap thing. It would bring it from 47 million to like 15 million or something like that. But bringing it to 15 million, it opens up, more of we've already used the taxpayer MLE, so we don't have access to the non-taxpayer MLE. And then it would give us access to the biannual exception. It would get us lower, it would get us more away from the luxury tax. So it's really just a cost savings move, right? Or if you're of the belief that we're better off not having him on the roster altogether or just buying him out, like it really doesn't. It just depends on what school of thought. That's not a school of thought that I'm consistent with, but it just kind of sort of gives you the idea that like that's sort of the deadline. If they were going to make that move, that's when that would happen. That would be July 31st. But the more important date to keep track of is August 4th. So August 4th is when LeBron can officially sign his extension. And so that's the first day he can officially start negotiating his extension, and he can sort of have that discussion. Now, I suspect that because it's August 4th, that starting next week, you're going to start hearing more about him applying pressure on the Lakers with his extension. The most he can sign is for 2 years because of the over 38 rule. So he can either sign straight up 2 years with no options and fully guaranteed, or what I think he'll most likely do, should he decide to extend with the Lakers, is a 1+1, which is he's guaranteed next year, and then he has a player option the same year that Anthony Davis has a player option. Now, there's a good chance next week you're going to hear about him possibly thinking twice about signing that extension and having, serious discussions. That's just usually the thing that you always hear. Like they're having serious discussions to make sure that, the Lakers are aligned with what he wants to do. They want to continue to compete. And, again, more reading between the lines, he wants the roster that he wants and whatever it's going to be and stuff like that. And I think the Lakers are going to acquiesce. Like, I don't think there's going to be any back and forth about that for his extension. I think everybody is on the same page. I think there's just a different level of urgency. And I don't think LeBron is being kept in the loop in regards to how close they may be to a Russ trade, whether it's for Kyrie or for something else. And that's just because that's just the nature of the business. It's usually, he said it himself, like he doesn't push the buttons. He just, if they ask him a question, he answers the question. So I think that will be a very interesting. It'll be a regular conversation topic the following week if I'm trying to predict it out. But I think ultimately the Lakers will come to some sort of conclusion, and so will he, in regards to an extension that makes sense in the capacity he wants. The one that gives him the most control is the 1+1. To be honest, like he has the most control. He can leave when his son is drafted if it's not to the Lakers or whatever it is. But like you're going to hear more noise. Like you're going to continue to hear a lot more noise, and it's going to be a lot of just rephrasing of the same information over and over again. Um, but the reality is the Lakers aren't going to do anything until they know that Kyrie is off the board. Because if they're going to spend any draft capital, it's going to be for Kyrie, or any significant draft capital. It's going to be for Kyrie. It's not going to be for Buddy Hield and Miles Turner. And the way to think of it is this: if the Nets trade Kyrie before they trade KD, it hurts. It takes away the leverage point, if that's what you want to call it, of the run it back leverage point. It just goes away. So then at that point, the offers for KD will worsen, right? They will get worse. So if it's Toronto or the Suns, they as soon as Kyrie's gone, they know, oh, okay, for sure, you have to trade KD because KD doesn't want to be there without Kyrie. And so that's part of the issue that the Nets have to navigate. And you know, I would imagine Sean Marks is the person that called the San Antonio Spurs and asked them, what they were going to do with their cap space because he has some relation to them and he has some association with them. And that's why you're hearing them as a potential a third team destination for a Russ contract. They're bottoming out. They know exactly what they want to do. And it's the same thing for guys like, for teams like the Jazz. If they go in that direction, they trade Donovan Mitchell. Like how close, how hard are they going to work towards being one of the worst teams in the league if that's the direction that they go in? So those are just things that like we have to be patient about. And every single day, people get on and complain and ask why nothing has been done and why we haven't taken the first deal that's available and why we just haven't traded the players away. Like it's just not smart business. It's not a good way to go about doing things. And I think it's right, at least right now, until we know that Kyrie is, off the board, whether they're running it back or whether they're, something else happens altogether. Like the Lakers are going to wait. They did this with Kawhi. They've done this with like literally every free agent superstar because you don't want the narrative to go the other way, right? If they trade for Buddy and Miles and it turns out that Kyrie would have been available, like it doesn't even matter if Kyrie would have been available. Like the media will spin it in some form to say like, oh, well, you could have gotten Kyrie for that package. The Nets would have taken it. And then all of a sudden now the Lakers look dumb either way because they pulled the trigger too fast. So if the asking so the other thing I also think of is this: the fact that there's this much noise about a potential Russ for Buddy and Miles trade and stuff like that. The reason, even though there's a bunch of noise, like that's a good thing, right? Because that means that there's multiple Mark Stein, Shams. Like all it says to me is that there have been active conversations about moving Russ to a team like Indiana. So all it does is it adds validity to the actual trade conversations. So for teams around the league who thought maybe the Lakers were bluffing or maybe the Lakers had absolutely no market outside of Kyrie for Russ, that's not true anymore. Like now teams around the league who aren't in active conversations with Lakers, if they were, they weren't taking the Lakers seriously, now you at least know that people in Indiana and guys like Mark Steins, like they've mentioned, hey, they've actually had conversations. They haven't reached a point where they've reached an agreement, but they've had conversations. So, there's ways to look at this both in depending on what sort of place that you're in. That it's a good thing that they haven't pulled the trigger so quickly. Player evaluation, is Buddy worth the first? Is Miles worth the first? Do we want to trade him to Indiana? Do we want to wait out Kyrie? There's a lot of different ways to sort of look at this and stuff like that. But this is continual noise. And so I just want to kind of drop in because this week it's been all Indiana, right? Like I feel like it's literally been Monday was like the Lakers are waiting on, the Lakers are interested in Indiana. Then like not even Monday, I'd say it was like Wednesday. The Lakers have had conversations and are waiting on Indiana. Then Thursday, we get a drop from Shams saying, "Oh no, that deal is dead." And then Friday, you get Mark Stein saying, "Oh yeah, indeed, they've actually had conversations, but there's been no word about what the actual draft compensation is going to be." So there's a bunch of the wave is almost like, "Oh, it's possible. Oh no, wait, it's dead. No, wait, actually, it is possible." And then you get like Dave McMenamin reporting, "Oh yeah, they're not going to do anything until they know Kyrie's off the board." So it's just again, it's just daily stuff, just daily stuff that continues to happen. And I think it's just going to continue to happen. It's going to turn up because LeBron's extension is coming up. And that's going to be a big sticking point. So you're going to hear Brian Windhorst or David McMenamin say something to the degree of, this may be LeBron's last extension, or this may be, whatever it is. Like, are the Lakers committed to LeBron? And is LeBron telling the Lakers that they're not committed to him, then he'll leave and blah, blah, blah. And, more theatrics and dramatics and stuff like that. But I don't think there's any confusion. I think the Lakers are committed to seeing LeBron finish his career in LA if that's what he wants. But there just has to be a level of patience because we can't force somebody into a trade. Even if the Lakers offer 2 first-round picks for Kyrie, the Nets aren't going to trade him to us because it will kill their leverage when it comes to the Kevin Durant trade. It's just that simple. And they're not going to do anything that kills that ability. So maybe there's a chance that conversation that Sean Marks had with Rob Pelinka, many weeks ago or a month ago or wherever it was, maybe it was Sean Marks telling Rob, "Hey, look, if this situation goes in this direction, are you guys willing to wait for us if we have to drag this out?" That might be what it was. And if that's what it was, then this sort of falls in line with what it is, and just kind of what's supposed to happen. So everybody just has to sort of, play their part. In my opinion, everybody should just play their part and be patient, and just go from there. But you're going to continue to get daily drops and stuff like that. So I thought I'd just jump in and just kind of talk about it because it's been crazy to see, like, just kind of this weird that, like, Russ shouldn't be this much of a conversation. Like, he's going to get traded, but it shouldn't be like this much. It shouldn't be this much about who he is as a person. And like, it feels like that's all the conversation's been about. It's not even about basketball fit. People talking about a 6'4" guard and how much he screens for his teammates. When have you seen Frank Vogel run sets where the point guard screens for the Lakers, for other players? Was Rondo screening for other people? Was who else did we try to play at? Was Dion Waiters screening for other people? Was Avery Bradley screening for other people? What part of Frank Vogel's offense involves guards screening for other players? Nobody thought for a second to ask. Maybe the reason why Russ wasn't screening was because he wasn't being asked to screen. Maybe he was just being asked to stand in a corner. I like I said, like I don't understand. Like, Zach Lowe put out that note saying that after the Memphis game, Russ had 6 or 8 screens for LeBron or in that Memphis game, and then he said the next 6 games after that, he only delivered 1 screen per game. But did he mention that LeBron didn't play in 3 of those games? So who is Russ going to screen for? Because when LeBron went down immediately after that Memphis game, Russ was the guy who had the ball in his hands the entire time. So what was Frank Vogel going to do? Was he going to give the ball to Rajon Rondo and then have Russ screen for other guys? Was Russ going to screen for Talen Horton-Tucker? Is there an advantage that the Lakers gain when a guard screens for another guard? That's just basketball. Like, I don't know. Like, I get it, man. Like, I understand, but it's just some of the stuff is just it's not even necessary. Like, I don't know why people are trying to make it more than it really is. It's just he's not a good basketball fit, and our star player doesn't want to play with him. That's it. There's nothing else to it. That's the only justification that you need to move him, which is fine. But the extra stuff that's being put on about it is just, doesn't make any sense. So, all in all, I just thought I'd just kind of talk about it because it's been bizarre to see. And I don't think some of this stuff is grounded in sincerity. Uh, I think we could just call a spade a spade. He's not a good fit for this team, and that's okay. I think Darvin Ham does think he can get more out of him, and that he may actually be right about that. But I don't think our star players want to play with him. And somebody's got to be the fall guy. That's just how this game works. And so, we'll see what happens with him ultimately. But just, I just encourage folks, if you watch this channel, just practice patience. Like, you're just going to hear a lot more noise. Um, and remember, it doesn't benefit anybody. It only benefits the media because we retweet it or we share it and stuff like that and get their engagement numbers up. So, if nothing else, um, this is just my check-in with everybody. And I hope everybody's doing well. As always, if you can like and subscribe, I appreciate it, and help the channel grow. But we should start hearing some more news as it gets closer and closer to LeBron's extension, both good and bad. But we'll see what direction it goes in. I like I said, I don't think these teams want to go in with malcontent players or risk malcontent players going into training camp. And that's not just Russ. That's also Kyrie. That's also KD. That also maybe Donovan Mitchell. Not that to say that they're malcontents, but they players know when writing is on the wall and that sort of stuff. So it'll be interesting to see just kind of what happens moving forward. So as always, I appreciate everybody for tuning in, and I hope you guys all have a wonderful day, wonderful evening, and I'll see you guys in the next video. See you later.